Nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with an episode of Cheap Shots. This is the series that helps you to save money on the miniatures wargaming hobby. And on today's episode, we are going to show you how to cheaply and quickly paint up some Mordheim scatter terrain for your future campaigns set within the City of the Damned. As you can see in this photo, this is what the end result will look like. And by following the tips, tricks, and techniques that we recommend on this video, you can paint up this entire set for a total grand investment of $18.78. And when you compare that with the same materials that you need to purchase from both Citadel as well as Army Painter, you're talking about a grand total savings of $108.47. So with that being said, let's get you guys rolling and show you how to quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up some scatter terrain for your games in Mordheim. Now, first of all, if you want to know where I got this terrain set from, I actually got it from one of my buddies. Dark Lord Mac is actually starting to experiment with doing some 3D printing on his own, and so this is actually one of the files he managed to download for free, actually, for some D&D terrain kits. What it was basically, it was called the Docks, I believe is what it's called. So it consists of a series of barrels, crates, bags, ropes, bolts of fabric, that kind of thing. So because of that, he was able to print a couple of these up. Unfortunately, his first batch came out a little rough looking, so if you'll notice, this one actually looks a little textured and a little rough, and he was actually thinking about just, getting rid of it, but I was like, no man, don't get rid of it, give it to me instead, because I could definitely use it, because hey, I'm getting it for free. So that part's amazing. So the first thing to do, of course, is assemble your miniatures. As you can see here, I have a couple of Age of Sigmar round bases that I've collected over the years, and I just put these directly on top of it with some super glue, and the next thing I do, of course, is texture the bases. Now, my basing technique is actually quite simple. It consists of wood glue, water, as well as sand. First thing I do is I paint the bases with just the cheapest wood glue I can find, and then I dust it with some sand that I get outside from my backyard. And once it dries, I then create a sealant by creating a 50-50 mixture of wood glue as well as water, and then I just apply it over it, all over the texturing like a wash. And when it dries, it actually creates a very tight sealant for the texturing to stay on the bases. Now, once that dries and cures, the next thing you do, of course, is to prime your miniatures. In this situation, I use a can of Krylon dark mocha satin spray paint that I get at my local Walmart. It cost me $4.99. And all I do is I just do a quick once over with that spray paint all over the entirety of the miniature, so that way it does two things. One, it primes the miniature, and the second thing it does, of course, it gives a good base coat for us to work off of in order to paint these up very, very quickly. Now, priming is important, and the reason why is because what it does, it gives an uneven textured surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. If you were to paint your miniatures on bare plastic, what ends up happening is that the acrylics of your paints would just rub off at the slightest texturing or the slightest bit of friction, because there's nothing for the acrylic paint to adhere to. So that's the reason why we do that for priming as well. And since these are going to be mainly made out of wood, the brown actually does a lot of the base coating for us. So all we got to do from there is to dry brush and add details. Alright, so the next thing I do, of course, is a quick dry brush all over the entirety of the miniatures. In this situation, I use Territorial Beige by Apple Barrel Paint. It cost me 50 cents at my local Walmart. All I do, of course, is just take the paint, do a quick dry brush all over the entirety of the miniature. Now, what dry brushing does is it actually creates the illusion of depth on your miniatures by allowing the pigments of the paint to adhere to the raised surfaces of the miniature. What this does, that means that it creates highlights while leaving that darker color in the base coats and the recesses of the miniature as well, adding that illusion of depth. So I just do a quick highlighting real quick of dry brushing using Territorial Beige, and then move on to our next dry brush. Now, the next dry brush I use, of course, is Light Mocha by Apple Barrel Paints, and what I do is I once again use this on the entirety of the miniature, just to add that additional level of highlighting directly onto the miniature. What that's going to do is going to create that nice range of colors between different grains of wood. It's going to create that illusion of wood grain on your miniatures as well. So just do a quick highlight real fast and dry brushing of some Light Mocha, and then move on to our final dry brush. And the very last thing, of course, I do is I do a quick dry brush real quick with some Drizzle Gray by Delta Cerancoat. You can get this from your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. And once again, I just do a quick dry brushing with the gray on top of the brown that I've done already. Now, I don't worry about the burlap sacks or the ropes that I have scattered on my terrain. I just concentrate directly onto the wooden crates. And the reason why is to create an additional layer of highlighting on top of that. At the same time, also gives this kind of like an aged, kind of weathered appearance. After all, this is supposed to be inside of Mordheim, which is a city that's been abandoned shortly after a meteor shower, and so that's the reason why I want to create that kind of ashy, kind of dusty look with it as well. And then when we're done with that dry brushing, we start moving into our base coats for our finer details. So scattered throughout all these different terrain pieces are some burlap sacks that are right next to the crates. Now for those, I base coat those in 2 thin layers of Folk Arts Burnt Sienna. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby or Walmart for about 75 cents. And all I do real quick is just a quick base coat all the burlap sacks. Now the reason why I do that is to add a little bit of visual interest to these set pieces. And the reason why is because if you just leave it all brown, it's going to look quite boring. So you're going to add some details and some different colors to it just to break up the monotony of all the browns you're seeing in the actual overall paint scheme. So by using that burnt sienna, it's a nice deep reddish brown color. It does a beautiful job, especially when you take out pieces of leather or in this case burlap. I just put 2 thin coats on that and then I move on to a dry brush. Alright, so the next thing I do of course is hit those dry brushing with all the burnt sienna that I did earlier with some Folk Arts Terracotta. Now you can get this at your local Walmart or Hobby Lobby for about 75 cents. All I do real quick, of course, is do a quick dry brushing with the terracotta on top of the burnt sienna to add a little bit of texturing as well as a little bit of depth to the burlap sacks. And as you can see, it looks really awesome as well. So now that we're done with the burlap sacks, the next thing we do now is some of the finer details on these set pieces. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do real quick, if you notice in these burlap sacks you see right here, if you notice that a couple of them actually are ripped up is what it was. During the printing process for my friend Dark Lord Mac, he made a couple of errors. You really can't blame him because this is the very first time he actually printed these things. So you can see these bags are not exactly fully developed, they're kind of like jagged looking. Which is perfectly fine because what it looks like if you look in closely, it looks like there's like some kind of token or some kind of like round object inside those bags. By doing so, maybe look at the bag got ripped, exposing the contents inside. And since, of course, the warbands of Mordheim fight for Weirdstone, I decided to make it look like it was actually bits of Weirdstone inside these burlap sacks. So to create that, I just put 2 thin layers of Holly Branch by Apple Barrel paint. You can get this at local Walmart for about 50 cents. It's a nice, bright Christmas green color, perfect for creating Warpstone as well as Weirdstone. I just put 2 thin layers on top of that. Now the next thing I also did next is also concentrate the bolts of fabric on some of these crates. To bring out that detail, I just put 2 thin layers of bright blue by Apple Barrel paint. Once again, we got that from Walmart for 50 cents. I just put 2 thin layers on that to create that bolt of fabric look. And then lastly, what I decided to do is pick out all the coils of ropes that are scattered throughout the terrain pieces as well as around the burlap sacks with some khaki by Apple Barrel paint. Cost 50 cents at a local Walmart. Just put 2 thin layers of that and it once again creates that beautiful detail as well. And once again, I am going back to that khaki paint for all the coils of rope that are scattered throughout the terrain pieces. As you can see in these larger pieces, you can see those coils of rope right next to the crates. I just picked those out 2 thin layers of that khaki paint as well to create that additional layer of detail that are going to be on these terrain pieces. So once I'm done with that, the next thing I do, of course, is dry brush the details I just painted in different colors earlier. For the Weirdstone tokens that are located inside those burlap sacks, I just do a quick dry brushing of lime sherbet. It's a nice pastel green color. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. Just a quick dry brushing on those Weirdstone tokens to give them a little bit more detail and as well as some depth. And at the same time, with the bolts of fabric that I did in blue earlier, I picked out I just picked that out in a real thin dry brushing with some sky blue, just to add a little bit of detail as well as some highlighting for that as well. And believe it or not, we're actually done with most of the detail work on these miniatures. The last thing we'll do real quick is to working on the iron bands of the barrels. Now if you notice, the barrels of course have these black iron stripes across them. I did is I picked those details out in 2 thin layers of Apple Barrel black. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. And what I decided to do was to pick out those details in black. And the reason why is because a lot of barrels back in the old days were used to be picked out with strips of iron, just really cheap hammered out iron that you used to bind these barrels up really quickly as well. And so I wanted to create that same effect. So I just put those details in 2 thin layers of black, and once that's done, we're actually all done with the detail work. Next thing we need to do now is start working on some washes. Now, normally when it comes to washes, what I like to use an oil wash on these, but I decided to skip that step just because I didn't really want to be bothered with it. Instead, what I did is I made my homemade wash. I just took Burnt Umber by Apple Barrel paint, which cost 50 cents at your local Walmart, as well as Moccasin Brown by Adidas acrylic, which cost 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. I just took those paints, just did half in one color and the half in another color. So I just take those paints, I just mix it with a little bit of water until about the consistency of milk, and then I just paint it over the entirety of the miniatures. These aren't really going to be all that detailed, and they're not going to be all that important or focal pieces for my terrain. I just want to do something that's really quick because I really wanted to move on real fast, so that way it dries really quickly. So I did half the terrain sets in the Burnt Umber wash and the other half the terrain sets in Moccasin Brown. Now the reason why I did that is because the Moccasin Brown gives it more like a reddish brown wash, while the Burnt Umber actually gives a dark brown wash. And then of course, once I do those washes real quick, I just set it aside, wait for about 30 minutes to an hour for it to completely dry, and I move on to the base work. So the bases on these were really simple. I decided to do the traditional green base on these so that way I can use them for my games in Mordheim and I can use them for Warhammer as well. So because all I did is I just picked out the bases, the texturing, and 2 thin layers of English Ivy Green by Attleboro Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. Just a quick 2 thin layers on top of it just to capture all the texturing as best as I could. Now if some of the brown undercoat does peek through, it's perfectly fine. It's not really going to matter because once we dry brush it, it's all going to blend out anyways, and if there's anything, it does make it look like it's part of the environment. So once the English Ivy Green dried, just did a quick dry brushing real quickly again with lime sherbet all over the texture of the bases. As you can see, that darker green and brown is also in the recesses of the texturing, while that bright green is on the top of it as well, and it looks really, really awesome. Gives the illusion of grass and other things like that. So now we're done with that. Last thing we do, of course, is to rim the bases. So once again, all I gotta do, of course, is just rim the bases. I use Palm Leaf Green by Attleboro Paint. You can buy this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. And I just do 2 thin layers of this all over the rims of the bases just to give it that nice finished look on the miniature. And as you can see, they look really, really awesome, and they look just as home on my battlefields of Warhammer Fantasy as they would on the battlefields of Mordheim. And once again, this is the end result that we showed you guys at the beginning. As you can see, it looks awesome with a beautiful tabletop standard and is ready to be used in your games of Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Kings of War, Frostgrave. Well, maybe not Frostgrave because Frostgrave is frozen, but still, any game that requires a fantasy element that you want to put on some terrain pieces for scatter terrain, it works perfectly for that. So now that we're done talking about exactly how you went about painting this up using our Cheapskate method, let's go ahead and talk about the shopping list you need to get from Games Workshop's Citadel, as well as Army Painter, to paint exactly the same way we did, and talk about the price that would cost you. Alright, so let's go and talk about the items you need to purchase from Citadel as well as Army Painter to do exactly the same technique we did with our Cheapskate method. First of all, you need to buy a can of Ronnox Hide Spreads, which costs you $33 in order to prime as well as the base coat miniatures. And then from there, you'll need to buy Bane Brain Bound, Militarum Green, Vulcan Green, Abaddon Black, Teclis Blue, Caliban Green, Cyberite Green, Blue Horror. All those cost $4.55 per pop. You also need to buy some Wildwood, which is going to cost you $7.80 for that, as well as Baylor Brown, Ulthuan Gray, XV88, Doombull Brown, Squig Orange, all those costing you $4.55 as well. Now, if you decide to do the spray varnish like we did, you'll need to buy a can of Munitorium varnish for $19.50. And if you want to do the basing like we did, you'll need to buy a pot of Sterling mud, which costs you $7.80 for that. Now, when you combine all these things together, and assuming you're purchasing it all for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $127.25. Now, when you compare that to my Cheapskate method, which is only $18.78 to do it this way, you're talking about a grand total savings of $108.47. And with that money, you can use the same thing to buy like starter box sets or start collecting box sets, or just better yet, just save it and not spend it at all. So there you guys have it. This is how you guys can quickly paint up some Mordheim scatter terrain for your games of Mordheim, Warhammer Fantasy, Kings of War, or any fantasy game that requires scatter terrain. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is valuable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blog.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this, you guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.